Victor Newman reveals secret letter from his first defeat. Shocking Y&R spoilers. In the ever-turbulent world of the young and the restless, many moments strike as deeply as when Victor Newman, the insuperable Goliath of assiduity, the Black Knight of Genoa City, admits to a defeat. For decades, Victor has stood as the personification of power, strategy, and ruthless determination. He has crushed commercial adversaries, manipulated rivals, defended his family with ferocious intensity, and survived backstabbings that would have destroyed lower men. Yet in this explosive new chapter, Victor does commodity no bone. In Genoa City ever anticipated, he reveals a secret letter from his veritably first defeat, a loss so ruinous, so particular, that he buried it deep within the vaults of Newman Enterprises and within the guarded chambers of his own heart. The disclosure begins still, nearly deceptively so. The Newman family gathers at the estate, summoned by Victor with an urgency that sends a ripple of anxiety through Nikki, Victoria, Nick, and indeed Adam. Nikki, ever attuned to her hubby's moods, senses commodity is different. This isn't a boardroom initiative or a calculated strike against an adversary. There's a graveness in Victor's posture, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes that unsettles her. For a man who has always equated vulnerability with weakness, this subtle shift is seismic. Victor holds in his hand an aged envelope, yellowed by time, the edges worn. The Newman crest is stamped noiselessly on the reverse, but the handwriting is unmistakably his, decades youngish, less steady, written at a time before Newman Enterprises came a global conglomerate. He explains that this letter was written to himself after his first true defeat in business, a hostile preemption gone awry, or adventure that bring him everything he'd erected in those early times. It was a moment before he came the legend Genoa City would both sweat and respect. The room falls silent as Victor begins to relate the story. Long before he married Nikki, before Victoria and Nick were born, before Adam's complicated actuality entered his life, Victor was simply an empty entrepreneur with ambition blazing in his modes. He'd invested every bone, every ounce of pride, into a parlous succession. Confident in his instincts, certain of his superiority, he undervalued one critical factor: fidelity. A trusted supporter betrayed him, siding with a rival pot and leaving Victor exposed. Overnight, he lost control of his company. His dream atrophied. For the first time, his children hear about a Victor Newman who failed, who tasted demotion so bitter it nearly broke him. Victoria's face tightens. She has modeled her own leadership after her father's grim confidence. Nick shifts uncomfortably, facing echoes of his own struggles with living under Victor's towering shadow. Adam, ever logical, studies his father nearly, seeing that this concession carries deeper meaning. Victor reads from the letter. His voice, generally commanding and sonorous, softens. In the letter, he writes of shame, of the crushing consummation that brilliance alone isn't enough. He writes about pride bedazzling him, about dismissing warnings from those who watched about him. Utmost strikingly, he writes about fear that he wasn't insurmountable, sweat that he'd no way recover. Nikki's eyes coruscate as she listens. She has seen Victor furious, triumphant, agonized, and revengeful but infrequently reflective. The letter reveals a man stripped of pride, defying his own limitations. He'd written that defeat would either define him or upgrade him. In that vital crossroads, he chose to let it forge him into commodity stronger, colder, more calculating. The stunner lands when Victor admits why he has kept the letter hidden for so long. It wasn't simply a relic of failure. It was a memorial of the man he formerly was, a head power hardened him. He confesses that in recent weeks, as pressures within the Newman family escalated and old battles resurfaced, he began to see patterns repeating. Victoria's aggressive pushes imaged his immature overconfidence. Nick's moral conflicts echoed the dubieties he formerly suppressed. Adam's hunger for confirmation reflected the lonely ambition that formerly consumed him. This isn't just a history assignment. It is a warning. Victoria challenges him incontinently. She argues that defeat is part of growth and that she isn't the reckless youthful superintendent he formerly was. But Victor's aspect is steady. He reminds her that arrogance can disguise itself as confidence. Nick weighs in, questioning whether Victor's secretiveness about his once failures contributed to the insolvable norms he set for them. Adam, with quiet intensity, asks whether Victor ever truly learned from that first defeat, or if he simply erected walls high enough to help anyone from seeing his vulnerability again. The battle escalates, but underneath it lies commodity profound, a family reckoning with the myth of Victor Newman. For times, he cultivated an image of invincibility. That myth shaped his children's individualities, fueling both their ambition and their resentment. Now, with one fragile piece of paper, that myth fractures. Meanwhile, beyond the estate, whispers spread. News of Victor's unusual family meeting reaches commercial cognizance. Rivals smell weakness. In Genoa City, perception is power, and indeed a hint of vulnerability from Victor Newman can shift the balance. Old adversaries begin strategizing, wondering if this emotional disclosure signals insecurity at Newman Enterprises. Yet those who underrate Victor do so at their pitfall. The letter doesn't represent rendition, it represents elaboration. By defying his first defeat openly, Victor reclaims it. He transforms it from a buried shame into a strategic assignment. In a private moment with Nikki latterly that evening, he admits that he's tired of pretending he has no way stumbled. He wants his children to be stronger than he was, not simply clones of his ruthlessness. Nikki gently reminds him that strength also lies in translucency. Their marriage has survived numerous storms precisely because, at critical moments, they chose honesty over pride. She sees this disclosure as a turning point, not just for Victor as a businessman, but as a father. As the week unfolds, the ripple goods consolidate. Victoria re-examines a high-threat junction she was prepared to push through. Nick begins meaning a more independent path, determined to forge success on his own terms rather than chasing his father's blessing. Adam, maybe most affected, wrestles with the consummation that his father's harshness may have stemmed from fear rather than pure atrocity. In an important ending scene, Victor stands alone in his office at Newman Enterprises. The megacity lights glimmer outside the window. He folds the letter precisely and places it not back in the vault, but in his office hole, accessible, no longer hidden. His expression is bent. The once no longer controls him, it informs him. The plot underscores why The Young and the Restless remains a Goliath of American Day TV. It dares to humanize its most redoubtable character without dwindling his power. Victor Newman's first defeat doesn't weaken his legend, it deepens it. It reminds observers that indeed the potent conglomerate is erected on moments of mistrustfulness, and that true strength lies not in no way falling, but in rising with lesser wisdom. As the fallout continues, one question lingers over Genoa City: has Victor's vulnerability made him more dangerous than ever? For when a man who has conquered every external adversary eventually confronts his internal bone, the metamorphosis can be seismic. And if history has proven anything, it's this: Victor Newman doesn't lose doubly. The shockwaves from Victor's concession continue to resonate across Genoa City, and in the world of The Young and the Restless, emotional foreshocks frequently prove more destructive than any commercial war. What began as a private family reckoning soon transforms into a catalyst that forces each Newman to define not only Victor's history but their own. The morning after the disclosure, the Newman ranch feels different. The air is thick with contemplation rather than battle. Nikki watches Victor from across the breakfast table. His reading fiscal reports, posture straight, address composed, but she notices the subtle shifts. His not barking orders into his phone. His not snapping at sidekicks. Rather, he pauses, thoughtful, as if importing opinions against a new internal scale. Victoria arrives first at Newman Enterprises that day, determined to prove that her father's story doesn't apply to her. She strides into the superintendent's suite with confidence, but the echo of Victor's words lingers in her mind. Arrogance can disguise itself as confidence. She reviews the junction documents again, checking protrusions she preliminarily accepted without vacillation. A small clause catches her eye, an exposure threat she had dismissed as negligible. For the first time, she questions whether her drive to outthink a rival dazed her to advising signs. Across city, Nick wrestles with commodity deeper. Victor's admission unsettles him not because of the business counter-accusations, but because of what it reveals about the emotional armature of their family. Nick has long indicted his father of emotional manipulation and insolvable prospects. Now he wonders, was Victor pushing them toward excellence, or was he desperately trying to help them from ever feeling the demotion he formerly endured? The distinction matters. Nick visits Sharon, seeking perspective. He confesses that hearing his father speak about fear, real fear, shifted commodity inside him. For times, Nick framed Victor as an irremovable force. But now he sees the possibility that important of Victor's harshness stemmed from terror of vulnerability. Sharon, ever perceptive, suggests that understanding someone's injuries doesn't excuse their conduct but it can explain them. Nick leaves with a complicated blend of empathy and undetermined resentment. Adam's response, still, is the most unpredictable. To him, the letter is both disclosure and accusation. However, why did he weaponize that pain against his own son? Why did he test Adam relentlessly, frequently intimately undermining him? Adam confronts Victor in his office. If Victor understood the pain of defeat. You knew what it felt like, Adam says, still, eyes blazing. You knew what failure does to a person. And you still set traps for me. Victor doesn't redirect. He doesn't roar. Rather, he meets Adam's aspect. And admits that he believed pressure forged adaptability. He stressed that if Adam weren't hardened, the world would crush him. Adam counters that constant testing nearly destroyed him anyway. The exchange is raw, concentrated with times of resentment and craving. For the first time, Victor apologizes not theatrically, not strategically, but unfeignedly. The reason doesn't abolish history, but it fractures the wall between them. Adam leaves unsettled, doubtful whether to trust this softer interpretation of his father or brace for the ineluctable return of the Black Knight. Meanwhile, word begins to circulate beyond the family. A board member overhears fractions of Victor's concession through an adjunct. Rumors spread that Victor is reassessing his leadership approach. Challengers smell an opening. One ambitious CEO schedules a surprise press conference, intimating that indeed titans can stumble. The recrimination is clear. At Newman Enterprises, fidelity is tested. Some directors worry that Victor's vulnerability signals insecurity. Others, particularly those who have survived times under his iron command, feel a strange swell of respect. A leader who acknowledges one's failure can be changeable but also redoubtable. Nikki becomes the quiet strategist behind the scenes. She understands the delicate balance between perception and reality. She advises Victor to address the board directly, to control the narrative before rivals distort it. Victor originally resists. Public vulnerability is a threat he has no way embraced. But Nikki reminds him that the letter isn't a weakness, it's evidence of adaptability. The board meeting becomes a defining moment. Victor stands before directors who have followed him for decades. He recounts his first defeat, not in grainy detail, but with enough candor to command attention. He explains how that loss reshaped his approach, how it tutored him to anticipate treason and value foresight. He makes it clear that Newman Enterprises stands strong precisely because he formally learned the cost of complacency. The room is silent, also sluggishly fills with applause. Mistrustfulness dissipates, replaced by renewed confidence. Victor has not relinquished power, he has reframed it. Back at the estate, Victoria grapples with her own pride. She confides in Nikki that she fears being seen as reckless. Nikki assures her that ambition isn't recklessness but unbounded ambition can be. Victoria begins to consult her platoon more collaboratively, inviting differing opinions rather than dismissing them. It's a subtle but meaningful shift. In the weeks that follow Victor's astonishing disclosure, Genoa City does what it always does when seismic emotion collides with commercial power. It watches, it speculates, and it positions itself for advantage. In the world of the young and the restless, vulnerability is no way just particular, it's political. And when the most important man in the megacity acknowledges his first defeat, the ripple becomes a reckoning. The fiscal press begins anatomizing Victor's speech to the board. Judges debate whether translucency signals maturity or impending transition. A prominent business columnist publishes an instigative piece named, "Is the Black Knight Softening?" The composition suggests that Victor's openness may indicate race planning. The enterprise ignites quiet maneuvering inside Newman Enterprises. Victoria reads the composition doubly. Outwardly, she scoffs. Inwardly, she feels a flicker of urgency. However, every decision she makes now carries amplified weight, if the request believes Victor is preparing to step back. She schedules strategy sessions not to impress her father, but to solidify her own authority. Yet commodity has changed in her approach. Where she formerly bulldozed dissent, she now invites debate. The shift unsettles some directors habituated to her iron resoluteness. Others drink it. Nick, meanwhile, takes a different path. Inspired by Victor's hard-earned assignment, he refuses to chase dominance for dominance's sake. He finalizes plans for a sustainable casing development design aimed at revitalizing underfunded neighborhoods in Genoa City. It's ambitious but values-driven, lower about conglomerate, further about impact. When he presents the offer to implicit investors, he openly discusses threat mitigation, citing a assignment learned from watching someone who formerly believed he couldn't fail. He doesn't name Victor, but the recrimination resonates. Adam's elaboration proves the most complex. Victor's reason lingers in his mind like an echo. For a man who erected his identity around proving himself to an impenetrable father, hearing guilt destabilizes old defenses. Adam channels that insecurity into focus. He spearheads a digital invention action within Newman Enterprises, championing for adaptive strategies rather than brute force accessions. His offer includes contingency modeling, anticipating failure points before they materialize. When he presents the plan, Victor listens without interruption. That alone shocks the room. Subsequently, Victor nods formally and says, "You've reckoned for the eyeless spots." It isn't demonstrative praise, but for Adam, it's seismic confirmation. Nikki observes all of this with quiet perceptiveness. She knows Victor better than anyone. The concession didn't weaken him, it recalibrated him. But recalibration is delicate. There are moments when she sees the old kickback flicker, the instinct to dominate, to conceal, to strike preemptively. She gently challenges him in private, reminding him that growth isn't a single disclosure but a sustained choice. One evening, Victor receives an unanticipated caller and senior man named Thomas Keller, the former co-worker who betrayed him during that first disastrous preemption decades ago. Keller, frail but sharp-eyed, claims he read about Victor's speech. He confesses that he has carried his own guilt for times. The treason, he insists, wasn't purely opportunistic. He'd been dragooned by larger commercial interests, manipulated into believing Victor's ambition would buckle the company. The battle is tense but subdued. Keller expects rage. Rather, Victor surprises himself by feeling commodity near to check. He tells Keller that the treason shaped him but it didn't define him. Keller leaves with a quiet reason. Victor remains alone in his office, meaning how else this meeting would have unfolded 20 times ago. The youngish Victor would have destroyed him. The present Victor feels no need. Yet not all forces in Genoa City interpret his elaboration as strength. A rival empire initiates a covert crusade to destabilize Newman stock, laying that public perception of transition equals vulnerability. Anonymous sources blunder rumors of internal division among the Newman siblings. Victoria confronts Victor with the substantiation. "They suppose we're shattered," she says sprucely. Victor's eyes flash, not with instability, but with strategy. "Also, let's give them commodity they won't anticipate." He orchestrates a rare public appearance featuring all three of his children standing beside him at a press event publicizing a major humanitarian investment and a new expansion action. Cameras capture Consinity. Judges scramble to reinterpret their narrative. The stock stabilizes, also climbs. Behind the scenes, still, Consinity is still a work in progress. Nick struggles with dubitation. About the expansion action, concerned it risks overextension. He debates defying Victor intimately but recalls the assignment of the letter, Unbounded Pride Hangout's judgment. Rather, he requests a private meeting. In that meeting, he articulates his enterprises calmly, fortified with data rather than defiance. Victor listens. They differ but productively. It's the first time their dynamic feels like collaboration rather than collision. Adam faces a different internal battle. Old precariousness brute that Victor's newfound tolerance is temporary. When a minor design falters due to force chain detainments, Adam braces for rebuke. Rather, Victor asks, "What did you learn?" The question disarms him. Adam responds with candor, outlining corrective measures. The exchange reinforces a new pattern: responsibility without demotion. Victoria's growth is tested when she uncovers a misapprehension in her earlier junction assessment, an oversight that could bring millions if ignored. The old Victoria might have buried it to save authority. The recalibrated Victoria brings it directly to Victor. She expects disappointment. Rather, he regards her steadily and says, "You saw it before it came fatal." That's leadership. The protestation strengthens her resoluteness to lead else. Meanwhile, Nikki hosts a charity fete at the Newman ranch, symbolically transubstantiating the point of Victor's concession into a stage for renewal. Genoa City's nobility attend, watching the Newman family nearly. The atmosphere is elegant but charged with subtext. Exchanges swirl about race, consanguinity, and heritage. During the evening, Victor delivers a brief speech. He speaks not of subject